If you notice my thumbnail, the actual picture of me for once has smiles on it because YouTube asks you to smile for the camera so that you have a nice thumbnail. I notoriously have these thumbnails where I have these distorted faces, just stuck in these distorted faces as I'm very seriously talking about something. So it's nice to be able to smile at you for once. It's been fun to come over here to YouTube because I can see that here I've got a little bit different audience in the sense that many people on Facebook Live will see it there, and there's no need for them to see it here. But then you folks many of you on YouTube have been with me for years. I know that. Some of you are just coming to this, but thank you for sitting down for our low budget sad song. There's a couple questions that have come in recently um, about chronic pain and addiction and how they relate to awakening. One particular question, I probably won't even be able to find it. Essentially, it was someone who has the same diagnosis, or one of the, I have how many diagnoses that I get for my spine? Like at least two and maybe three. It's been so long and I've done so much inquiry on the diagnoses that I can't remember them. Like they're not, you know how a lot of times when you're diagnosed with something, it's really at the forefront of your consciousness. Like I'm a sufferer of arthritis, like we identify with it. And that doesn't happen for me anymore because the diagnoses were just these words that did not help me in the end to heal the chronic pain. And so, in inquiring, I inquired and saw the emptiness of those diagnoses as part of the letting go of the idea that it's physical, which is one of the reasons why I titled it this way, because the line reality, the nature of reality is non dual. That's what we've talked about from the beginning here. But there's these leftover beliefs that many of us have to question. So the thing about non-duality, people might think in one fell swoop of a realization, you now see that there's no separation everywhere. That isn't really how it works for most people. There's pockets of separation that shows up in like beliefs. And one belief is if you've grown up your whole life being told that the body and the mind are separate, even though you know in your experience that's not the case, a little bit of leftover belief can pop up when you get an illness or a chronic pain situation. How you treat that will show you whether you have the belief that the physical is separate from the mental and emotional, or that the mind and the body are separate. So, humbly, I will say to you that there was a leftover pocket of belief that was really, I wasn't aware of it, and it was showing up as I would not go to the doctor, but go to the doctor with the idea that he was correct, that his diagnosis was correct, and I just believed it and didn't realize the implications of that belief. For me, you put your trust in a professional and you think that professional or those professionals won't lead you astray. But what if they are ignorant? That's the thing. My doctors were completely ignorant of what was really going on with me. And so the question that I got around this person has spinal stenosis. And so they caught on to the fact, I think I wrote spinal stenosis in one of my video titles. For those of you who don't have it, don't get too don't get lost in the details of this diagnosis because if you've ever read John Sarno's book, he lists a whole laundry list of spine related or knee, shoulder, neck, hip pain, like painful conditions, all of which he's seen to have an emotional and or psychological root. So spinal stenosis is just one of those. Okay. The takeaway here is that don't get caught up in the spinal stenosis conversation here. Notice that if you have some chronic pain area, go read John Sarno's book first, Mind Over Back Pain, or really any of his books, where he lays out all the different diagnoses for chronic pain situations, and then he shows why, and with very strong logic, like a scientist logic, why these physical abnormalities are not actually the root of the serious chronic pain that people actually feel in those areas, which is mind-boggling to someone um, who's grown up in Western culture to believe that. Um, it is mind-boggling now that well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, having seen what I've seen now, it is crazy the extent to which we hide this from ourselves as a human race. I want you to just listen to me for a second. We're literally living in ignorance. When I read the definition of spinal stenosis, I think about that helps to understand the abnormality itself, meaning the first few lines of this definition make sense because I've seen this on an MRI. The first few lines are spinal stenosis is an abnormal narrowing of the spinal canal or neural foramen that results in pressure on the spinal cord or nerve roots. Symptoms may include pain, numbness, or weakness. There's loss of body control after a while, certain functions of the body if it gets worse. The sten the prognosis generally is, or at least I was told by so I had 3 surgeons and 2 pain management doctors. I remember all of them either saying explicitly or implying in some way that it's not going to get better unless there's medication or medical treatment. Like, it left on its own, it's not likely to get better. So the prognosis for this particular condition isn't really good. I am going to answer your question in a second. Um, I'm going to get to the question in a second. I'm just laying some groundwork for those people who are just tuning in. Again, don't get lost in the details. There's a larger thing to be seen here, which is in our minds, we still might make clear distinctions between mind and body. And then when we get diagnosed with something that is quote unquote physical, if there is an emotional or psychological root, the way that we are divided in the mind about this can actually create, like it did for me, much more suffering than needs to happen. That's the moral to this story here. Um, the person who asked me a question is essentially kind of flabbergasted, like, I have spinal stenosis, the person is saying, and they're having trouble wrapping their mind around the fact that I don't have pain anymore because they live in such pain. And I know that pain. I also have a couple of other conditions. So, to the extent that I can say my experience is like that person, it isn't. Like, all perception of pain is different with each individual, as you know. So people could share the same diagnosis and have a totally different experience. One thing that a couple of things, if I can remember, that John Sarno says that are important just on the outset to hear is that over the course of many years of studying these different chronic pain situations, he would see certain people the abnormality would seem much worse on an MRI than it would for another person. But sometimes, even when it looked much worse, that person didn't have much pain at all, whereas someone with just the slight narrowing might have a lot of pain. So that didn't match up for him. If the abnormality, the seriousness of it is the thing that's creating the pain, why did he see people with very serious cases of it who didn't have much pain at all? Also, he noticed that for his clients, and pay attention to this for yourself if you have an awareness practice, because this is an eye opener, is if your pain tends to switch and move around. So you might feel it in the lower back, and then it might not be there, but like your shoulder is hurting today. And then for a while, and then maybe it goes back to the lower back. He's saying if the abnormality in a particular area is the cause of it, why is the pain moving around where you don't feel the pain signal coming from that area very much when it has moved to another area? He's essentially saying there's more going on here, and that's the psychological and the emotional trauma, unresolved, is what I've seen, and emotional repression, among other things, emotional and psychological, showing up as what feels like a physical manifestation. The person's question is essentially he's flabbergasted that this could be possible, and but also very intrigued. A very long email. I'm just trying to distill out what he's actually asking. First of all, I would like to speak to you one on one. I don't want to. This is a very sensitive topic, and I'd like to have a dialogue with this person if they feel like reaching out to me to meet with me about this. You don't have to be flabbergasted because what I'm saying is not actually new. And so you don't have to think that this is Scott Killaby's religion. First of all, it's not my religion. It's an insight and a realization that I had from very serious chronic pain that the root of it was emotional and psychological. I don't have any pain. In fact, it feels like the body of a child almost at this point because there's been so much healing. This is really unusual for this particular condition. As I've said before, I'm just trying to answer your flabbergastedness so you can see that there's more for you to pay attention to here. This is not just woo woo stuff. Like, first of all, go read John Sarno's books. Start there. Read all of them, but at least Mind Over Back Pain, or I think there's one called The Mind Body Connection. Then go to my Facebook page. If you look at my videos or scroll down the page, I have listed a whole long laundry list of scientific studies that have come out roughly in the last 10 years that are essentially saying our emotional system, our emotions are playing a huge role in many physical issues, up to including things like cancer. And it's the culprit in many of our mental health issues. Specifically, emotional repression is what they're studying. They're also studying just emotional dysregulation. So, someone who might be angry all the time, that might affect their heart, for example. We've kind of known that, I think, that stress makes things worse. But with this, what they're studying now is a little more insidious because it's like a repression of something. So you may not even recognize that you're repressing the emotion or emotions or whatever you're repressing. You may not even have any knowledge of it. I didn't have any knowledge of it. And that's how it remains hidden. And we have built a society that keeps it hidden from us. So, for example, I'm in, you should be able to relate to this if you speaking to the person who wrote the question, because when you get diagnosed, you often go onto the internet to find information about it and maybe even groups of people who are chatting about it. So, for example, I'm in several Facebook rooms, and one of them is I think there's like 1,500 people in there, and it's a room for my diagnosis, the spinal stenosis. If you could just listen to me for a second about what's going on in there, is that nobody of all the people in there, I've been in there for a long time, probably close to a year. I have not seen anyone in that room yet say, "Hey, my pain has gone away." What that conversation in that room is about is talking about pain relieving medications and treatments and a lot of depression and suicidal ideation. I mean, these are really dark posts from people who are struggling every day. Many of them are on disability, for example. We have built such a wall, a fortress around this idea that it's really hard with this new information to break through this fortress um, of how people think about these conditions. I'll explain what I mean. In that room, sometimes I post, "Hey, I had intense pain like you all. I was suicidal like many of you. My pain is gone now because I found out that it was actually emotional and psychological, repressed anger, unresolved trauma early." And there's just almost no response to my posts at all. And this is how we've been so thoroughly duped. So thoroughly duped because what Sarno says is that most of those kinds of conditions that he saw had an emotional psychological root, which is not to say there might be some out there that have like some traumatic injury where the physical aspect of the abnormality is creating the pain signal. But if you read his book, he's like that, in a sense, that's a minority. The majority of these conditions have some. So you can, when I'm watching these folks, it's like they're not even on the right track. So they're desperately clawing down a particular road towards treatments, medical treatments, medications that treat it as physical. And many of them are getting let down. Like some of them are getting some relief from these things, but there's just a grasping going on in there and constant posts about help me. This didn't work. Do I have to go to morphine now? So they're not even on the track yet to understand that it could have an emotional psychological root. So part of the issue, like with the person who's asking me this question, is one of my jobs is for to help you open up to the possibility of this, to be not so closed that you're not even open to the possibility that there's an emotional and psychological root. It's quite a miracle that I have no pain. um, by all accounts, I should still have pain. And by the way, many say that it's progressive, even that it gets worse. But after 2 years of onset, it just started getting better as a direct result of inquiry on somatic based inquiry connected to those issues that I mentioned. I've actually shared on these videos how I did that repression work and that trauma work. But I also say in these videos, be very careful doing that on your own at first. Work with me or one of our facilitators because we've learned to navigate this stuff skillfully. I personally went through it in my own experience, and now I've worked and helped many other people. And there's lots of traps and pitfalls to dealing with deeply somatic trauma and emotional repression. This is stuff that we've hidden from ourselves for a long time. So when we wake the dead, there can be a lot of turbulence. Hear me out here. So it really isn't unusual for me to be doing work with someone and their migraines go away or their pain somewhere goes away. But then the next phase is whatever emotion that they were repressing comes fully to the surface. And some of them don't know how to deal with that. To be honest with you, when the anger started coming up for me, without that thing that pushes it down, at first I didn't know how to deal with it because I repressed it so much. I'd never felt rage at that level before. And it made so much sense as to why I was in pain because of all that rage that seemed to be carried in that area. What's interesting is when I'm doing this work with people, they don't even a lot of them don't even start to get better until they access some really darker thoughts like I hate myself. I hate mom. I hate this person. I hate people. I don't trust people. I don't trust myself. Um, I can't express this, these kinds of things. I feel this way, but I can't express it. I'll be attacked. Dad will attack me or whoever. It's like a part of our ego program that just remains hidden to us constantly. And like continuously, we're not aware of the buried rage, the buried anxiety. And almost everyone is surprised to find out that they have these thoughts. But what I say is when you tap into that, it's like tapping into, I don't know what the metaphor is, but it's like striking gold. Because before that moment, you may not have a clear sense of what I'm saying when I say buried rage or buried anger. And theoretically, it may make sense to you. But then when you start seeing it, like literally seeing thoughts that you believe on a deeply unconscious level, pure anger, pure anxiety, fear, grief, something that was repressed. When that comes up, it's not just emotion. Sometimes it's thought, and the thoughts scare people. So when I encourage you to work with somebody, I'm not kidding. Do that for your own health. And then what we do in these sessions is we teach you how to regulate your system, how to do the work in a way that is gentle and humane, but still effective. So we're teaching you how to do the work on your own. And that becomes an important piece of this because you really can't clear a repression by like meeting once a week with someone. I don't think you can really, you can probably do it in that kind of therapeutic session, therapeutic setting once a week or with a therapist or a facilitator, but it may take a long time doing it that way because repression is a continuous mechanism. So if you're just meeting that mechanism and inquiring into it once a week, that mechanism may easily take hold of you in between sessions. So or a bunch of stuff can come up. If you don't have the skill when that happens, you can be kind of stuck in a certain place with all this, where these emotions come up, but you don't know what to do with them. They can even feel overwhelming. Part of what we do in sessions is help you with that, like prepare you for the experience of these emotions coming up so that when they do, you're able to be with that and even deconstruct that, to rest with that. So when I say work with someone first, I'm not kidding. You're going to be glad that you did when and if all this comes up. You're going to be glad that you have someone there who's been through it and who knows how to navigate it. And it can be quite lonely to be doing this on your own. Lonely is not the right word. Although you may feel alone in it, it can be very, very challenging to do it on your own. It's amazing that I'm sitting on this, like, and then looking out at the world and I'm saying to them, I discovered something here for you all. And who's listening, right? Just who's listening to this? This is big. Be careful with your mind listening to me because I've found before that the mind has a lot of defense mechanisms around not letting this repression come up. One of them is just like to just sort of label Scott as crazy, woo woo, or he's off his rocker, or this is for Scott's condition, but not mine. These are all things that are like contempt prior to investigation. So you already have contempt for this message, a resistance, or even a felt sense of shame based on what I'm saying, and that stops you from listening any further. You have to really be aware of that when you're listening to me. If you're not, you could easily be taken out of this conversation and you could suffer more. If your condition is as a result of these issues and you're shutting me down on the front end, it's almost like inviting more suffering. What's been so great about this is how replicable it is. Um, that the same inquiries that lifted the repression for me are lifting the repression for other people. So this is something that we can now, that other people can pick up. It's not just germane to me. There's people. Here's another way that people will dismiss what I'm saying. They'll say things like, "Well, Scott, you've recognized the awareness, so of course there could be healing." But this awareness that I'm recognizing isn't mine. It's the same awareness in your experience. There's nothing special about this awareness more special than your awareness. It's just awareness. Healing is as much available to you as it is to me. But one thing you're going to have to do, I don't know that healing is available to you. I don't know that. What I'm saying is this work is here for you to explore, to find out whether a healing is available to you. But if on the front end you're deciding that I'm whacked out or that there's something special about my case, be careful. That same mind is the thing that pushed down these emotions. Now, albeit the unconscious aspect of that mind. So be careful trusting this mind that's already been conditioned, perhaps not to even hear what I'm saying and to disagree with it. And also, that's the mind that repressed all these emotions. That's the same mind that you're going to find in inquiry that doesn't even want these emotions to come up. So, why would it be completely open to what I'm saying? Just assume that your mind is not, on some level, completely open to what I'm saying. There will be some of you out there who are open. I have met you. What I'm speaking to are those that are still fighting this and suffering because of it. Even when you become open to this message, what I found is even when I became open to the message that perhaps my chronic pain was the result of repression of emotion and trauma, even if you, once you become open, then you have to become skillful because even being open isn't enough, is what I found. Because I read John Sarno's book and it was enough to make me open, but I didn't have the skill. So many people will start fumbling around in consciousness with very kind of unskillful questions designed to reveal some, but not most, of the thoughts of repression or the emotions. And this is another thing I've been talking about. Our spiritual practices seem to have been designed, many of them, to keep the repressions in place. Our spiritual practices are also keeping trauma unresolved. People are coming to this work after being in non dual teachings and learning that something else has to be processed, that you can't just sort of recognize the great I am or the awareness and then that's it. It's not like that. People are doing those practices, those awareness practices, sitting with teachers, and then suddenly something comes up in the body, and the body, because it keeps the score, it makes it very difficult for that person at some point to even do those practices. And because some of them are actually reinforcing the repression, reinforcing the unresolved trauma by not going deep into the body and mining out this material. So the body's holding all the information, keeping the score. So when we start learning, the first thing is okay, can we just be open to this message first to begin exploring? But then, even when we begin exploring, a lot of times we go back to the same practices. Hear me out. The same practices that have not worked. How do you know that your past practices haven't worked? Because your body is still as congested or contracted as it was, or there's not much movement in the body from those practices. How do you know that that's happened? Because you're listening to me. There's a reason that in 29 minutes into this, you're still listening. So, in further listening to me, all that I'm saying is you may have to abandon many of those practices and start anew with me. I had to start anew. So, again, once I became open to the message, what I did is I fell back on my practices that I'd already known. Resting as awareness, noticing what arises, allowing it. Sound familiar? A little inquiry, but not very skillful on repression, just not focused on the issue. And these practices that's it. That's the issue. They are not directed towards a line of thinking, unconscious thinking and feeling. These practices are not designed to unearth that and lift it up. Or even if they do, they're not designed to stay with that so that it gets fully lifted or the trauma fully resolved. So just a little bit of these practices give us a little bit of relief at a time. Like a trauma response will come up and maybe one of our practices will just take the edge off of that or deconstruct it a little bit. Or we're just resting on a meditation mat and some repressed emotion comes up, but then it doesn't fully come up. And what happens is the body contraction remains after that. Or the pain. That's exactly what happened to me. With all my prior practices, they were not designed to get to this issue. Had they been designed to get to this issue, I may not have gotten into that bad of a place with the chronic pain, the repression. There's quite a lot of openness that has to happen here. Not only openness to this message, but then openness to realize that your old practices aren't working, just like mine. Becoming open to what it is that's working here in KI, learning how to do it, and then getting support in doing it. I really do think that folks out there that are dealing with a lot of body contraction, that fist in your stomach or that closed heart can really benefit from this talk because that's also unresolved trauma many times and repressed emotions. Let me just leave you with this. The insights that this gave me helped me understand what happened in my own childhood and what's happening in the childhoods of other people. Our parents are the most important people in our life. What they say, what they want, what they do is like God. We're under their domain. If it doesn't feel safe, or if there isn't a space for being able to express real emotions as a kid, if it didn't feel safe to get angry at dad, to be afraid of dad, to show fear, if it didn't feel safe to feel grief, to express grief in your family or shame, those emotions, that's trauma. But this issue of repression is more than trauma. And this is a part of the message that I want everybody to hear. The trauma happens, like being with a parent where you can't be authentic, and that's traumatizing to the system, scary, or whatever else. But something else happens as a result. And science says this too, that repression is a result of trauma. Now, think about it this way, it's really easy to understand. I'm not even talking about being sexually abused or physically abused. You can imagine in those situations where there's those kinds of event traumas where you would be repressing some emotion. It goes much deeper than that. I'm talking just about a father and a mother who don't beat you, they don't molest you. They're, by all accounts, maybe even decent parents, but you still couldn't because you wanted their love, you wanted their attention, you wanted their approval. You showed up in a way that they were okay with, which means you showed up without being angry. You stuffed that down. You didn't show up with your fear, even though you're feeling fear. Didn't show up. Felt like you couldn't show up with it. Your parents. I'm talking about decent parents. So understanding what the science is saying. This is why I like science because it tracks our experience. Science is saying that kind of thing happens, and then the repression is an offshoot of that. And you continue to repress those emotions to survive in all of your relationships after that. You learn to repress anger unconsciously. It gets you love, it gets you approval, safety, whatever else. You learn that. Your consciousness learns it, and then it applies it in every situation, every relationship. Hold back the anger, hold back the fear, hold back shame. That's how you're going to get approval, love from partners, friends, spouse. There you go. Now you see exactly what science is saying. So you don't even have to rely on science. Once you go into inquiry, you see exactly what science is saying. Something happened in some relationship. You couldn't be authentic. Unconsciously, you had to stuff down those emotions to as a trauma response. You're responding from trauma, and then that happens over and over and over again. It's exactly what science says is happening. You'll see it in your own consciousness and inquiry. I think that's it. But I'm going to come back on and talk about someone asked a really good question around addiction. Hang out here, guys, because I'm going to talk about that within just a few minutes. Thank you. Love you guys.